Hello, I'm going to show you the Inspect SQL module. Let's press the New button here. We create a new Inspect SQL section here. And then you can extract SQL statements from SGA or Auto Workload repository. So I'm going to extract SQL statement from Auto Workload repository here. So I check the day of week. And then we can see that I have a high SQL workload on Thursday. There are 130 to SQL statement here. So I am going to extract those SQL statements and try to analyze those SQL statements with our Inspect SQL function here. Now the SQL statements is showing on the screen. You can press OK and accept the extraction. And the SQL statements, which are extracted from database, will be analyzed by our inspector. Okay, the analysis is finished. And the first one, we got the SQL resource signature analysis and 80-20 rule assessment here. So the 130 SQL statements will be displayed in resource consumption order. High resource will be ordered first. So you can see that. Here is the 80% resource spent point here. So which means that in the left-hand side, here there's two SQL statements. Spend up to 80% of resource already. You can see the result here. There are 4 SQL statements. Around 3% statements spend up to 80% of elapsed time. Or SQL statements spend up to 80% of CPU time. So you can focus on these SQL statements. And you may improve up to 80% of resources by tuning of these SQL statements. So let's take a look on the SQL statements here. Okay, so you can tune these SQL statements one by one. So you can pinpoint the critical performances problem in this database easily. We are not using the old school method that top 20 high workload SQL statements or something like that. But why top 20? Why not to 5 SQL? What we want is the most critical SQL that is worth it tuning. Of course, we also provide this method here. So for most of you already familiar with the top 20 SQL resource consumption method. So you can see that the CPU time up to 97% for top 20 SQL statements. It's not necessary to tune all top 20 SQL statement. If you don't have time, you can focus on these 3 SQL statements will be good enough to solve most of your resource performance problem here. And the third one are what we call the query plan analysis. Query plan analysis, which is based on the query plan that we capture from Auto Workload repository. And we try to discover why that there's a potential problem for users to review the SQL statements. For example, this analysis tells you how many tables these SQL statements are assessing. For example, there are 30 for SQL statements with number of tables more than 6. I think users should check whether that are necessary to access so many tables like this. So you should review those SQL one by one to see why it is necessary to assess so many tables. The other problem is quite common. It is to pinpoint SQL statements with full table scan. For example, there are 11 SQL statements with full table scan with more than 500 megabytes table size. So you can check whether it is necessary to have a table full scan SQL statement like this. Okay, for example, this one with table full access for employee table. Okay, let me go to the last one. We call it SQL syntax analysis. This section is going to tell you SQL statements that may have the potential problems before it is getting worse. For example, you've got the hard-coded literals in your SQL statements which need parametrization, from hard-coded literals to bind variables. So you can see that if there are more than 108 SQL statements, which is up to 81% of total SQL statements, with hard-coded literals, with the execution times less than 2 seconds, why we are using less than 2 seconds criteria. Since compared with this execution time, the SQL parsing time will be relative high. For example, if I talk about a 2 seconds execution time, if the SQL parsing time is 1 second, it's too high. So I think we are providing an indication that what SQL statements should be parameterized. Let me show you the set operator's problems. What is set operator? It's the union minus intercept. This kind of SQL statements with set function, which means that your SQL statement is quite complicated, or it's a multiple SQL statements that are combined together by the set functions. So you have to take a look on that, whether it's necessary to write. So complex SQL statements like these. So there are 3 SQL statements with set operators. More than 6, which means that they are long SQL statements. You should take a look on that, okay? So I'm not going to go through all analysis functions. You can check it out in our product and try by yourself. Thank you for watching our demonstration. Thanks.